Welcome. This week on All Chill, No Shill, we have Flycatcher, or Orlando, and we're going to be chatting, and Orlando is the first guest on the podcast in a little bit of an impromptu let's get it done fashion. So
before we had video,
yeah,
we only had audio.
We only had audio, and it was Discord audio, so it was really, really bad. Well, it's been a couple of months since we started everything.
Yeah, when I think about all the things that changed since that time, wow, yeah.
That was pre-land,
pre-land,
pre-Toadex.
A lot of things.
Oh yeah.
I think I was only involved for like a month.
This will be a little bit different because this isn't going to be a fresh intro, first interview type thing. But I still think we should go and take it right back to the beginning. If you're down to go all the way back to the pews and kick it off there.
Oh, you can do it.
Yeah? Frogland's not the first time you've been on stages, is it? Going way back.
Yeah, so I think I was pretty prepared for getting on stage because when I grew up, so I shared that I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. And I guess that was really interesting because when I was that age, 12, even younger than that. So I'm involved at 6. So by 12, my dad specifically is having me give talks in the congregation. And that's to a whole room full of people.
Yeah.
But he would write the talk and then prep it. Or he would write the talk and then give it to me. I would just prep it for the next 2 weeks until I nailed it. So it's more of like a
performance,
but you're using Bible scriptures in between and then reading them through the scriptures themselves. So you're buying time in between. And since there's already a buy-in on the idea,
yeah,
it's not as complex as, trying to talk to a raw audience that you don't know whether they're buying on what you're selling. And when I say buy on what you're selling, I just mean interested in what you're discussing or talking about.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like more so we are getting back into a world where people just aren't there if they're not, because we're not all so bored from just sitting in home. This is going to be a bit of a repeat because we are technically redoing your intro interview.
Yeah.
So
and I talk about a lot of things. So
I love that intro. I'm really bummed that we didn't have a video for that one. That one would have been really cool. So we kicked off. You were a Marine and then a mechanic, correct?
Yeah. I think it was a natural transition to just go from, being in a Jehovah's Witness household that was really strict to go into a Marines. It made sense.
Really strict.
The real motivation behind it was I didn't have a lot of opportunities afforded to me. And it just made sense to go to the Marines because it was easy to get in and get college money. Yeah. So I really wanted to go to college, and I didn't have access to money to go to college. So that's what I did.
So did you end up going to college afterwards?
Actually, it worked out really well. So I went to the Marines, I didn't see, or luckily, I guess I didn't see combat. It got pretty hectic, but I didn't see combat. And when I got back, I started doing the diesel mechanic thing because I was a diesel mechanic within the Marines. And I guess I just hated that job, working outdoors. No one really talks to you about jobs. It just kind of, you roll into
just
whatever
do this thing
is available. Yeah. So that was available to me, and it's like banging my knuckles, getting dirt knocked into my eyes on, rainy days. The vehicles that aren't in the bay that you can work on, you're working outside on those vehicles. So if it's like cold, rainy, you got to deal with all that. If I'm changing the oil, if I'm changing the engine, it didn't matter. So I just didn't want to do that anymore. I ended up really weird turn of events. I ended up having a conversation or having a relationship with a guy who worked there. And he was like, I was telling him how I hated my job. And he was like, you should just apply at Disney. And I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to get a job there, right? I'm a diesel mechanic. Sure. And what the hell did I do everything? I'm not an animator. He's like, no. I didn't understand even the structure of companies then. He's like, no, you got a Marine background. I think that you might have a shot. So he's like, just give me your resume. So I went home, typed up a resume. I had my sister type up a resume, gave it to him. And at the time, I don't know what I was thinking, giving my sister, like asking my sister to type that up.
Way too
much. The resume was all over the place. Nothing made sense. I didn't even proofread it. I just gave it to him. He was laughing at me. He was just like, man, what the hell was that you gave me? I was like, my resume? He's like, yeah. I just wiped my ass with that and threw it in the trash. There was text, nothing was right on that. I was like, he's like, yeah, you probably lost that opportunity. Sorry. And then he's like, actually, my wife rewrote your resume. You got an interview next week. So I
better in person.
Yeah. So to his word, like a week later, I had an interview. The interview went well. I still didn't know what I was in for.
So first step was security, right?
Well, that was security, and that's what I'm saying. The first step, I didn't know what I was in for at the first stage of the interview because it went so fast. 6 months later, I was having a conversation. I was at the house. It was late at night, probably 7:30 in the afternoon, the evening, on a Friday. I get a call on my house phone, and it was from like the HR lead saying, "Hey, I wanted to offer you a job," and I was like, "Yeah, right." I thought it was a job.
Oh, like, so you're saying like in between that, you were still doing diesel mechanicking and doing the security gig as a side thing.
I forgot about Disney altogether.
Okay.
I was like,
so when you got into Disney, what was your like original position at Disney? Was it as security staff?
Oh, security.
It was, okay.
Because of my Marine background.
Yep.
They were like, oh, well, when he offered me the job, he's like, the job will be in security. And I was like, oh, okay. And because of this, I guess because of the thoughts behind being a security guard in the States, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna take that serious. But it was actually one of the best decisions I ever made. I started the job. It was an hourly thing, but it had frequent bump ups in money, and I was able to use that to go to school because of the timing and what was set up. It was more of like observation and reporting. And I was working like at first I started in the graveyard shift. So it allowed me a lot of time to go to school during the day. And then I shifted to more important roles in the day. Then I was in the corporate building, and that transitioned to like during the time and where I was in my studies, I could transition into corporate communications. So I was just at that point where I wanted to almost finish off my business degree. And business is where I wanted to go. So corporate communications was like, oh yeah, that's a good, I could do that. And then I could jump into business from there. But I hated corporate communications. So bad.
No,
it's even that started opening up the idea of what I hated about corporate, period.
Yeah. Like I've found I would much rather be a contractor working with a corporation than work within a corporation. Because contractors, like, there's so many rules that you don't have to follow as a contractor. Not like it's more willy-nilly, but it's just like, you don't have to worry. Nobody's worried about you taking their job. There's none of that like internal anxiety and like barriers that are like, that makes no logical sense that this barrier is here, but it's here because like some random stuff is going on in the background between two people that like don't like each other or something, whatever random crud it is. And they don't teach any of that in business school.
And there's the obligatory, being the employee at the company. So even when, because everything, whether we admit it or not, everything's based on project management. There's projects that come in, there's projects that go out. Even when you're an employee, there's things that we're doing at a moment. And then once that's done, we roll into something else. Yep. It's those periods of rolling into something else or waiting for that other thing, like to get busy again, where you're just dealing with bureaucracy and games.
Yeah.
So I don't want to play those. I'd rather just come in when you need me and roll things out.
No, exactly.
So, right at that point in my career, I had a relationship. Like a really good friend of mine lived next door to me at my apartment in Burbank, and she had a really good relationship with the president of Disney at the time, of her assistant. And her assistant was like, hey, there's a head of visual effects at Disney that's looking for a coordinator, and you might be a good fit for that role. I'm like, well, I don't know what the hell. I don't even know what visual effects is. I love film. It's a complete dream, but I don't want to go into something I don't know nothing about.
Yeah.
So she contacted me, put me up for the interview. I gave her a resume that worked this time, that I typed, that I was sure of. And because of my Marine background, that he bid on it. The head of visual effects bid on it. And that's how I ended up in visual effects.
That's awesome.
And that jumping into visual effects was just a game changer. I really, really loved it. I can feel like this is what I want to do. This is what I'm really excited about.
It's creative.
From that point, it didn't even feel like work. It just felt like this is awesome. Especially at Disney, because I'm on the client side. People, if they want something, they're coming to me for it.
Yeah.
If they want time with my boss, they're coming to me for it. So I was just that dude.
Yeah. Just became the guy to go to.
But I didn't understand it. There's a trajectory on even all that. So he was going to be retiring soon. Maybe he was going to be leaving Disney, which ended up happening. Then I transitioned out of Disney. I left to go to a company in San Rafael in San Francisco. So that was a huge change. I had to move from Los Angeles, leave Disney, my secure spot, go to this company that they weren't sure what was going to happen. And they were trying to land some stereo work. And that's how I met Anthony and Damon. Yeah. Bugs and
working on their first startup.
So on their first startup. And that's how I got familiar with them.
I like to imagine baby Bugs back then.
Well, it was funny because when I walked in to meet them, Bugs was like he had a doctor's gown on. Not a doctor's gown, but like a doctor's jacket.
Yeah.
Like an open white coat.
Yep.
And I thought, what the fuck? I thought
there's some characters.
So I'm like, I don't know what I just walked into, and everyone was gone. So we had a sales guy, Greg. Greg wasn't there at the time. Damon was the only one there when I walked into the company. At this stage, I hadn't even gotten the job. This is just, I was coming in to visit the facility and to even determine if I wanted to get an interview.
Yeah.
So I ended up driving up to San Francisco for a week. And I met with a block of companies that I had slated interviews for through art, of course, ILM, bunch of them. And that was my initial introduction to meeting Damon. And we hit it off. He was cool. And after that, we just kept talking.
Yeah.
Damon,
I think in that industry, once you find some friends, you got to keep in touch. Because, I don't know. I feel like it's crazy. Because that whole time, every turn that I would have been, like, doing my own thing was always my out. Like, oh, I'm in a bad situation. I need to like start my own company, project, whatever. And that's the way that I can like transition next or whatever. Like leaving corporate, I could become a contractor and become like, you're not a independent, you're literally an independent business, but like you're an independent producer basically. And I feel like in LA, that's not really an option because everything is scaled.
It is an option, but everything is scaled. The option is to go freelance. But at the time I didn't know that. And I wasn't prepared to do that yet. Because to go freelance, you got to have enough background, enough history behind you where a show or someone's going to want to pick you up over a period of time to get them over a hurdle. So it's the equivalent of being a consultant or a contractor, but they call it freelance. Yeah. So you're not tied to, first of all, you're not tied to the overhead of the company. Yeah. They can always get rid of it because those guys are usually a little expensive because they're the nuts and bolts guys.
And those are those union employees versus are contractors not union employees? Or are they still under union pay and stuff like that?
Yes and no. In LA, they are. They fall under motion picture health and welfare, I think. But that is over time and based on who you talk to. So, overall, unions are really set up to kind of filter out the unwanteds, the people that you don't want as part of that organization. Yeah. And the small group of people you want to take care of within the organization. So I always found it hard to navigate any of that. It always came down to who you knew, the relationships you had, and who would be willing to open the door for you to go into that next stage.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's always been super challenging.
Yeah.
I'm just really getting to that point where I can call shots now, where
yeah.
Well, and that's a long time.
I was gonna say, I feel like you and I are probably both like, if I've accomplished anything, it's because I found a side door. It's almost never because I like walked through the form or the application or the front door kind of thing.
But I think what you have that I didn't have, you had the understanding or the awareness that I can create my own thing and I can make money on my own terms. I think that's something that you're not, because of LA and because of that structure, it's not the type of place where that's promoted. There's the idea of you have to jump on with this corporation that's going to take care of you, and they're going to give you, retirement, and they're going to give you, so you stay. Well,
because like that's the thing is what I was doing was not like a livable way to do things. Like it worked because I was in my 20s.
Oh,
and even towards the end, it was getting there. I was being a lot more selective in my later 20s and starting to be like, okay, I like having time to do my own thing and kind of like figuring things out a little bit more and being really a lot more selective. But yeah, in the beginning, I was like, oh, X Games, I'll go shoot that. Oh, like people are... Like I had some friends that loved setting stuff on fire. They were a fire spinning crew, and they were like, "Yo, dude, we're setting a snowboarding rail on fire, and then we're gonna go like grind it and stuff." It was just awesome. It was like it kept me busy for a few years, and I covered shows, and I was around like I don't know. There's enough lack of life. Not lack of life, but there's enough lack of interesting things to go do. It was great because my camera kind of like pulled me towards things that I was interested in. And it, like we were talking about earlier, gave me a reason to reach out to people. Because even back then it was like, hey, I can't afford a ticket to this, whatever economic conference or whatever conference, or like festival. Can I trade you some tickets for photos or do whatever? And that was honestly that if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have started on social. So it was good timing.
I think those are they give you the foundation. Those are foundational builders. Everything you commented on puts you in a different place and helps you build and create your own path. Mm-hmm. And I think that's more beneficial and that's more fun. The flip side of that is, while you're right, I do have more of a structure where I have money that comes in regularly, and at that age, things were great. And I was also getting the GI bills, so I was able to take the money that I was making from the government to pay for my school. I was just paying it right out of pocket during that time. There was no debt that was being incurred,
which is huge.
You stay with this company because you feel like, oh, this is great. There's the stability that I have. But there really is no concern for your growth. Mm-hmm. So you stay in that role. It's stable. You might incrementally get bumped up, or you might get like a 4% raise for the cost of living every year, or 2% raise for the cost of living every year. But now you're like, there's people who are like 50 and they're still assistants, or people who are, or they're still trying to get a manager role when there are other people that are getting hired right in as VPs above them or as senior managers above them, taking the place where they should have been with the familiar they had to run with it. Mm-hmm. But especially for a company like Disney, I mean, while it was a great opportunity, it doesn't allow a lot of room for growth. And once they have an idea of what you do, you're locked into that. Yeah.
Because I mean, nobody inside of a corporation, like if you think of it this way, a corporation, let's call Disney a movie factory.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay. Actually. So you gotta have the cogs that do the part as quick as possible. And then you're going to pressure the cogs because, every chain of the pipeline, it gets a little bit backed up. So then I'm sure by the time it gets to special effects, you're getting the backups of all of the, shooting, filming, scheduling, everything pushed towards you.
Oh, absolutely.
because it's towards the end. And so, yeah, I mean, there's no like, if you're already backed up or, you know, the pressure's on, which I would assume it typically is, where's the room for experimenting or like trying new things or, you know, pushing the boundaries, or even as a person taking a risk on somebody? Because if you're like, hey, we're on a tight deadline, we can find this person that thinks they can do it and wants to try, or we can just spend the money and get somebody that we know can do it and can do it quickly.
You're right. I never thought of it in that context. And visual effects is at the tail end. Well, I mean, at the time I didn't. Visual effects is at the tail end of the post-production schedule, which is after, you know, usually after or during the production schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And the production schedule is where you're going to eat up most of the overtures on things that no one anticipated, or, you know, oh, we can't go to that one location. We got to go to this other location. We got to do a B shoot.
Yeah. No, and it's kind of funny because that system of things happens I've seen that system in multiple ways. So like one of my friends is a blacksmith, but he always ends up, the blacksmithing work is at the end of the contracting and building of a house and stuff like that. So if they built the house and go over, which they always go over because they're incentivized to not do it under budget, then the onus ends up getting dumped on him. So like they'll come set up a project. He'll be like, get the materials. It'll be a 6-month window. And then they'll be like, oh, we've got to cut this and this out of the gate has to be 5 feet shorter, whatever. He makes some massive gates. But like
just described visual effects.
Yeah, exactly. And so
that'd be less.
Yep. And then I always talk about like video and photo is similar. So the sweet spot is actually when you have somebody coming directly in. So like for me, my sweet spot, or like what I was looking for was like, oh, okay, a company wants to come in and redo their portfolio, like their images, because their images are 20 years old. That means that in that same meeting, like at the end of my slides, I'm like, yeah, and here's the last video that I did for Corporation X. And they're like, oh, you do video? And I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. I have an extra slide about it if you want. It's just at the end here because this was just a photo thing. And then it almost always loops into, oh, well, we would love you to do photos and take care of the video, because then they're like, we don't have to find a video, you know, team or crew or try to, you know, with some of the corporations, I was like, honestly, it would have been, you know, they're going to be looking at like either somebody local to do a project that like, it's like you could have 3 people on it and chop it into thirds pay wise, but then it's going to start being like it's going to start creeping. Like I could do 80% of what I figured anyway for a short form, 80% to the level of what they would get from like going to an agency or something like that. Because an agency is going to typically, like I would have an agency before, they're going to hire me to go and just shoot the video, like just the video clips, not, you know, put together an idea and take it all the way through. They're just going to be like, here's our shot list. Go get shots of these things, and no real specifics, just like panning shot of this building or, you know, people rocking in a rocking chair. So basically like stock video, but to their like demands or whatever. And I mean, with the agencies, like they'd pay me almost as much as I would charge, about $500 more a day for the normal corporation than an agency would pay me. And I was still like, it was great. But the flip side of that is like, they're not paying for an agency that I'm their freelance help, and they're paying X amount for me. And then they have an editor, and then they have billable hours and all of that tacked on top. So like a project for me that might be a $20,000 project for me to build out or whatever, it'd be $100,000 project through an agency.
Yeah, because you have less overhead. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of where the freelance thing drops in for, it depends on how it's used. Mm-hmm. Like with on the commercial side, freelance works because there's less overhead compared to retaining the full staff that a lot of the visual effects companies have to do. Yeah. So when you start diving into visual effects houses, it's just a nightmare because they can't pay that much money because they got to retain all the staff. Mm-hmm. And then they're dealing with the studios, like trying to cut them short on what they were meant to do to begin with, or cut corners, or bring it in cheaper, or I I don't want to pay for another iteration on something. It's like, well,
everybody wants a guarantee. Yeah, exactly. Everybody wants guarantees. And, you know, in any kind of environment that's creative, guarantees are, I'm like, it just pushes, at least for me, it always pushes the side of like, okay, I'm comfortable going and putting extra hours to fix what I messed up. But I'm like, if I had somebody on staff, like, not going to lie, they're not going to get the extra hours, or like, I don't know how I would handle it. I'd probably just end up eating it, and I'd lose money on the project and still have to pay the other person. And then like their whole, the company's whole, and I'm, you know, whatever, profit losing business, I guess.
That is exactly what ends up happening. So a lot of times when the companies end up, like visual effects companies end up folding, they fold because they adhered to too many changes or too many demands of the studio that wasn't sustainable for them. With the idea of, well, we'll just get more work.
This will lead to more down the road. Yep. Yeah.
And then really just go to the place down the road as soon as they close. It's cheaper. Or it's not. Like, well, now we got to pay you more money because that other place closed down and we don't have a choice. So now that other company benefits. I think, I don't know, like I'm hoping that some of what changes that is Web3, because I feel like there is opportunity with Web3 to get the content creation and the actual people who made that more in the onus or in control of their destinies versus just a service provider or somebody like some throwaway person that just.
I mean, when you start looking at like YouTubers and what some of them are making just in the tail end of Web 2 of like, oh, we're just starting to finally give people, you know, part of it had to be commoditizing the equipment. Cause like, honestly, massive part of it still is for like that big, you know, professional jump is those are $100,000 cameras. They're, you know, multi-$100,000, you know, trucks and rigs and all sorts of stuff that comes along with it. They're not shooting, you know, Disney movies on a DSLR, and they're not, you know, there's research and development. So like there's definitely stuff that's going on at that side that is not going to get, you know, matched by individuals. But I think you're going to like, we'll start to see, you know, I think a mix is really cool because at a certain point, it's going to start allowing people to be in a spot where, you know, solo creators are going to be able to start mixing with production crews. But I think right now, honestly, from the videos or like the things that I've seen of people talking about it and my own feelings is like independent creators, it's always scared me to go on set somewhere because I'm like, it's a weird dichotomy. On one hand, like, yes, I could make this shot myself with nobody here. But on the flip side of that is like, you have everybody so specialized and so deep in their own area, you're going to feel like a goof or like a fool because like you didn't know a gaffing term or you didn't know X, Y, or Z. So you're always going to be behind like in the verbiage and like the industrial kind of context of it. Like it's
those are what I like to refer to as barriers to entry.
Yeah.
And every single like structure has it. So, you know, doctors have it. Doctors is more specific because you actually have to know these medical terms. You actually have to know these medical, you know, scientific knowledge of how the body works. But when you start working in visual effects and commercials and marketing, it comes down to just that. That's what determines my specialty, and that's what makes me an expert in what I do. Just because, and in visual effects, it gets completely ridiculous. Like there's things like, there's this term you don't know. It's a CBB. It's like, oh, damn. I sat there like, what is a CBB? I don't know. I don't even want to ask. Could be better. It's like, what the fuck? Are you serious? That's the extent of how creative you become. And a lot of the
they're like, sorry, we're really conflict averse over here. We don't actually want to say, please do better. Fully.
A lot of the terms in visual effects specifically are baseline on that. It's like, oh, you just take logic, wrap it behind it, and that's what that term means, but no one wants to say it, and they throw it around in the room, and everyone who's new is like, oh, I'm too afraid to ask what that is. And it's like, it's exactly what you thought it was.
You're like, so, you could have been the dog in the room. Just listen to the tone of the voice.
I've gotten beyond that, and I like to be the guy in the room that says shit like, "Hey, you know what? I have a stupid question," and 80% of the time when I ask a question, nobody in the room has an answer to it.
Yeah.
Or they all had the same answer. They all had the same question, but nobody had the answer, and they were too afraid to ask it.
Yeah. Or like the answer is just really bad.
But at the same time, you'll be looked at as the guy who doesn't know shit, or the guy who,
I always figure, yeah.
I wasn't experienced enough. Bitch, you didn't have an answer either.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's nice about coming in as like a specialist in a certain case is like I loved that. Like I could go and ask all the questions. Like if I'm coming in to shoot your company, I could just be like, hey, look, I got to learn everything. Every industry, look, you guys are not unique. Every industry has their own terms. And I'll just even like veil it sometimes if it's like, it seems like something I should know. And I'll be like, hey, I have a couple different like industry versions of that. Can you tell me what your version actually stands for? And then like you said, like a lot of the times they're like, cost, and they're like, I think it's A or B or whatever. Cause it literally is just one of those things. It's like a secondary language where once you know that and you've seen it in context, you can understand what it is, but like you don't need to know the full name. It's just people don't want to name things. I hate acronyms. We'll just leave it. We can leave it at that. Naming things is like, it's a tough one. But yeah.
I go to a supermarket and the woman who works behind the counter, she's on the cash register. But she could also be the currency expert. I don't know.
Yes, we're gonna make them the sandwich. What did Subway do? The sandwich artist, something like that. Yeah. And it's like, at what point are you pandering?
There's a lot of times in these structures that you're doing these created roles, so you don't have to pay people more money. So you'll run into that a lot too. Like, he's that's even with.
That's exactly the sandwich artist, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We're going to try to make the job not seem like it's making sandwiches or seem, well, like you alluded to it in the beginning, we have social pressures. And so you were worried about being a security guard at the beginning and kind of the context that's carried with that. I mean, Carrie's lab has security guards, but they also have NIH police. And what's always funny too, is it's like, nobody knows the difference between two different scientists. Like they're just scientists to normal people, but like in the science world, what's that?
Everything is quantifiable, or everything is relative.
Yeah.
Relative. Yep. So one of the things, like I'll just mention this, when I was worried about the whole perception of going into security at the time. And ideally during that period, if you were successful coming out of college, you were making $30,000 a year. So you're coming out of school with about $60,000, maybe $80,000 or more in debt, and you're able to get into a functioning corporate job making $30,000 to $35,000 a year. That was acceptable. That was like, oh, you're winning, because that's just where things were at the time. Mm-hmm. With everything that was explained to me and the way I was going to be making the money hourly. And because Disney was set up in this way where it's set up very similar to the productions, because security a lot of times had to work on the production.
Sure.
So
it's not going to be normal schedules.
Workday,
it's like 16 hours, isn't it?
A normal work day is structured into 40 hours, or a normal work week, which is like 8 hours a day. So between 8 hours a day, that was straight time. So that was whatever I got brought in at. So we would start at that time, it was something like $12.50 an hour. Mm-hmm. And then you'd keep getting a $1 raise up until you hit $16 an hour, like $16.50. But then that's just on your 8 hours. After that, between 8 and 12, you get like time and a half.
Yep.
And then after like 12, or what was it? After 12, you get double time.
They're like, we're giving you hazard pay because the fact that you're not setting the set on fire is amazing.
And then if you worked on weekends, like it still was based on where you were in the 40-hour structure. Mm-hmm. So if you worked on weekends, what I'm trying to say is with the 20-hour overtime, like I was going to school, I was doing about 20 hours of OT, and I was getting my straight salary, I was making well into like $60,000-$70,000 a year on top of also getting my college money to go to school and pay for that. So it was really about me balancing the time, which meant I just didn't have a social life anymore. Like I could only go on a date here and there. And then I was like, oh, my buddies were like, yeah, but then I would set up these holidays right after I was done with my finals, and I would be gone to Mexico for like 2 weeks. Right?
Yeah, go and have a good time. Oh yeah. No, I mean, that's, the ability to adjust your own schedule, to live within your own schedule, it's a challenge too. Because like, if you're going hard, you're going to lose out. And I definitely feel like, I don't know, maybe I probably could have done. So that was the weird thing. I was going to say I probably could have done better and been more socialized in my 20s. But like,
you could have, but not in Montana.
Well, no, but that's the thing though. So like, when I say socialized, I'm thinking in the sense of like corporate socializing. Because I shot shows in bars and stuff. So like my week, like Monday and Tuesday was my weekend. And then like Wednesday, there'd be like open mic, random event going on. Like I would literally, I think I shot over 100 shows the first year that I decided I wanted to shoot shows. So like 100 different, albums, like each one a night.
Wow.
Yeah.
So most of your money came through independent, like interactions with businesses, bar owners,
producers, production people. And it was bad. I mean, the thing is so like I had scholarships up until my junior year of college. And then I realized like, I'm getting really close to my scholarship money running out. And I always joke, I'm like, yeah, the dumbest thing they do in business school is teach you cost benefit analysis. At the same time, they teach you sunk costs.
So I started to wonder if a lot of the way college is structured is intentional, because they're not going to give you, the knowledge that you're being taken advantage of or being exploited. So they only want to give you the, the ideas of why you want to be exploited or what's interesting about being exploited.
They teach you how to go work for somebody. They don't teach you how to have a business.
That's what I say. That's what I say about being exploited. It's like, because the exploiters are the ones who want you to come to work for their company.
Yeah.
And not always. There's people who just have small companies that they're trying to build out. But when you get on a corporate level, that's exploitment on a level that you're not even aware of.
Yeah.
It's like you don't even know it until you start looking at the way things are structured internationally. There's only certain groups of people that are meant to win in that. And it's not, it's not the little guy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's probably one of those things that's cool about everybody coming into this is, varying stages of sort of building skills and then either not getting exploited, but like, I guess there is probably people that are. I don't feel like I've been exploited, just mainly because I've usually had my own kind of like say for things. But yeah, I mean, like really realistically, like there for a while, like I struggle to work with individual companies because like when I was working with corporations, like my goal is to like basically push the money to the point they have to go back and ask to raise the budget just a smidge. And that's where I want to be. Like that, like everything you learn about like running a studio, running that type of thing, like you want to literally just be on the cusp of like, we're going to have to go back and double check that number. Cause like,
that's the way it is even with getting a job. It's like, you don't take the first offer. It's like,
yeah. But the part about running my own company that's fucked me is now I have empathy for like the other side. And I'm like, now that it's cause like with the corporations, I just was like, hey, this is a really comfortable rate for me. And they seem like they're completely fine with it. I'm not worried about increasing it any. Like I'm super comfortable with what I was charging. And it gave me as much freedom as I could need. And like, sure, it'd be nice to make more money. But at the same point, I'm like, it's balancing out like how guilty or like how much extra do I feel like I have to do because I've, increased it from where I'm comfortable with it being. And so, yeah, empathy is kind of wild. There's not that many people.
Even that's a hard balance because you'll run into places that are taking the piss and they could have paid you more money. And they should have paid you more money, but they didn't, and you were okay with it because it was okay on your end. And I don't know. Like,
I looked at it was like when I got taken advantage of when I was younger, for sure. because there was so many people that wanted free work or were not willing to pay for stuff. But like, and even in tourism and economic development, there's so many people that expect like free images or free work and stuff like that from creatives. So there is definitely that, but that was not the world that I was in anymore. Like I have no problem telling people off on that side anymore. But
visual effects is the same way.
Yeah. It's like, I always liked the joke. Oh, are you going to walk into the boot store and just be like, hey, you want to give me these boots for free?
It's so many people that start early, like, oh yeah, you know, your entry into this field or into this, you know, industry, that end up, you know, we're doing free work or working for a facility that closes down on them. It's, you name it. It's like some shady shit that's happened.
Yeah.
Like even big companies. Like,
I think there's good ways to do it. I think that like you have to know what you're working on. So like if I was going to do free work, I would own the images. So like with producers, if they didn't want to pay, they didn't get the photos, I put them out on my company. Like I put them out. So I gathered the audience.
So those come with, knowing that comes with experience. And that's why you were at an advantage to a person that would just take an hourly job because they're not in that mindset of thinking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even to negotiate a better rate from a vendor that they might use, they might not. Yeah. They might not
get it yet.
Yeah.
Well, and it's wild too how much everything seems like yes and no. So like people, like I was like, yeah, there's a lot of times where like, depending on the person, I'm like, yeah, I would have negotiated smaller, but like I'm not going to start with the small number. And so like you lose like the top, whatever it is, you know, scrap of like, you want to be in the ballpark of like most people can't afford you, but you have enough clients that can, it's like sustainable and good profit. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of things where I'm like, yeah, I mean, especially if I'm interested in something, I definitely will negotiate because like I have an interest in doing that. Oh, so yeah. I'm going to take I kind of think of it as like my continued education kind of thing.
Exactly. I'm okay with it. It's like, all right, well, I won't charge you as much because there's something for me to get out of it and I can grow.
Yeah. And if I was charging full price for like anything, I'm going to like, I only want to charge full price for something I'm truly like confident is in my core wheelhouse of like, yep, this is the bread and butter, the thing that I know I can do on a professional level where I never have to come back to a client and be unreliable. Because that was half of my work towards the end of it. Like my pickup stuff was just other video people or other photo people would screw up a job and they knew if they called me, they never called me first because I was expensive, but they knew if they called me 2-3 days and I could have the project done, you know, shot or whatever, and it'd be done and they'd be able to like still make it in under the deadline.
I think that's the same like across the board. I'm feeling like that's where it is because you know, like I've started doing different types of work, and with visual effects, there's a lot of checks and balances in long form where you're like, all right, well, this company is, you know, they can achieve X, Y, and Z. That, you know, like the ILMs, the scan lines. It's like you already know what they're able to achieve. But then there's the smaller companies like Trickster or just smaller places here and there that you're not really sure what they're able to achieve, and you take a chance on hiring them. Yeah. And sometimes they just blow it out of their ass, especially in like, there's a lot of companies that are available, like they're available for work or services in India. You really have to
know that you've got the right one. Yeah.
Like what their capabilities are, because you take on that work, you assign them that work, you're expecting to get something back. They've eaten through your 3 days. They can't do shit. Then you got to send that back to the expensive guy you just mentioned. And at least with India, I'll be able to say, you know what? You didn't give me anything and I have to send this to somewhere else. I'm not paying you for that shit. So
because you don't have to run. They're not in town.
And it's not even so much that they know that they're taking the piss. So you're just reminding
they know that half the time they're not even.
Don't try and act like you knew what you were doing. Then you got other companies that just can't get it right. And they're like, well, we used this time and we did what you told us to do. We just didn't do it to the expectation and the level that you thought we could do it. And that's relative. It's like, well, do I pay them that $50,000 even though they completely screwed it up, and I still got to spend another 20 grand to hand it to Hazer to get it right. You know?
That's why I like being the fixer, not the person that has to decide that decision. That's like, I love having a scope of how everything's going on, but I don't want that decision of like, here's your, like, I work really good within like, here's the budget. I'm going to maximize for the budget always, because like, I'm like, all right, cool. If I'm happy with the budget, I'm going to figure out what the maximum amount of time that I can be working on it. 'Cause I'm happier when I'm working on something. So like, not to the point of like, oh, I'm going to do, 90 hours a week because there's a budget XYZ, but like, I'm going to be like, all right, cool. Once you start getting into the spot of like, oh, okay, I have these people. I know how much this one costs ish. Maybe I can bring him on, or maybe I can bring other people, versus it just being like, oh, well, pitch us a project. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. Or pitch us a budget. Because it's like, you don't even know where to start.
These are the problems within visual effects. And these are the problems that they haven't really sussed out. So it's been sussed out on some levels, but typically you got a big company like a studio that realizes they're over their head and they don't want to spend as much money as they should on getting this job done. And then they're just cutting a bunch of corners. Mm-hmm. So at that point, the visual effects studios are literally planning from the place that you just mentioned. Like, oh, well, if we do this at 90 hours within a week, and then we bring on this other, so it's already at the expanded worst case scenarios that you're planning for your best case scenarios. Yep. And you're still hoping you're going to get it in at this budget. Yeah. If the stars completely align and all of those things happen perfectly, we'll be great.
So I think the other reason I have like traumatic flashbacks towards just the word producer in general is when I think of producers, I think of the people that throw festivals or throw shows. And in a good production, everybody eats except for the producer. In a bad production, half of the people don't eat. The producer loses money. Like half the people don't get paid. And it's like, it's like, and they still have to continue throwing shows after that, because that's like their job is to like.
And that's been a problem. That's been a problem in the different types of producers. Yeah. So you got the producer that is the visual effects producer that's trying to protect his staff and his maybe facility and the company that he's part of. And then you got the film producer who doesn't give a shit. And if it's a big name, he's like, well, I'm going to get my 10 million. Or I'm going to get my 2 million. I'm going to get my 3 million. And then the above the line's got to get their 20 million, their 30 million. and then when you get down to visual effects is just a line item in that whole thing.
It's the line item. It's the last thing. It's the first thing to get. Well, is it the first thing to get cut?
It's not the first thing to get cut. It's the last thing to get cut, because that's what they have to do. It's like
first thing to cut corners, last thing to actually get rid of.
We've already spent all this money, so this budget that we have here
is all you have to work with.
It'll be locked in, but you've got to cut corners because of what we had to do in film. It's like, oh well, and they'll.
So what's the sweet spot?
Undermine you in it.
Yeah,
it's like, well, because we did these on set. Like we shot these guys on set. These guys no longer have to do this visual effects or these face replacements or whatever. Yeah. It's like they'll just dig into what your budget is.
They'll just start cutting into it.
We never agreed on this. You just said you're going to do that.
So what's the sweet spot in a film production then? Who's the person that has the most free reign, or not person but group, I guess? Like what's the sweetest spot in a production?
The sweetest spot in the production is easy. That's creatives and the studio. That's the sweetest spot to be in, because they're the ones who pitch the idea, or they're the ones who greenlight the idea. They only have to keep the pressure on the service people to provide something for them, or the production. So at that point, it just becomes the higher you go, it's like a layer cake.
Yeah.
The higher you go, those 3 people at the top are the best off. The further you get to the bottom, the guys closest to the bottom are the worst off.
That's funny. I feel like, that chain. So what do you think would fix that? Like what formation, maybe not fixes it, but alleviates that? And how can that be applied into because I feel like that'll be a crossover of Web3 is starting to realize like we live in a world where a single person can create pretty insane shit. Like, I don't know if you saw Bo Burnham's last comedy skit, his like COVID skit, but he filmed the whole thing in his house. I'm sure it drove him freaking nuts. So we're at this world where like, yeah, a solo individual going freaking nuts can produce this level of thing. And it's pretty good. They can't produce everything. I think that's where it has to fit into a certain box, but
I'm happy that technology is where it is, because technology moving forward means that individuals can capitalize on that technology, and they can move themselves out of being marginalized from entry. So I think that's what the corporations have been able to exploit and companies have been able to exploit up until this time, is that we don't have those resources and we don't have the ability of doing these things. It's like, even on the early levels of visual effects, there was like this $100,000 suite that everybody wanted to get that could, edit movies really easily. And then you only had certain companies that could get that suite, that could open up and then build on that. And then there was other things like, even things down like to the file formats that DCP is a file format, right? It's a file format that only the studios will work in, or if you want to supply something to them, that's the only way they'll accept it. If from a normal guy to just make something in DCP, it's like
you can't play it anywhere.
Yeah, you can't play it anywhere, only on there. So it's a barrier to entry. It means that only these 7 studios are going to control all the work that's being created, and that's what content creation is really about now. Where it's like, well, there's a lot more content that can be created. There's value in content, which is why Netflix and everyone else jumped on it, the way they did.
Yeah.
But it's no different than what you're doing from to the music artists, where you're just raping them for what they created, giving them pennies on the dollar, just points. We're not even talking about dollars, like not even pennies. We're just talking about points, like percentages, very low percentages. And that's going to be your ownership of the creativity you put into this, because we owned all the resources to put it out there and get it out to the world.
Yeah.
So I think when those things are opened to more people, then you have less puppet masters at the top that can control all that.
Yeah, that's definitely been the driving factor for me, is when we talk through this, I'm like, yeah, the biggest thing, I will usually take more risk so that I can have more control, and not in control of like, I'm not really like I want to control everybody around me, but more control as in I can always scale back or like scale up or scale down my own life expenses, whatever, get creative.
Yeah.
Like I can go scrounge around if I need to. I can go do X, Y, Z. And I mean, that was the thing. It's like in my 20s, I was like, no holds bar. Like, I don't care. I lived in my car for a while because I wanted to, figure out if I needed to go to LA and stuff. So I spent 3 months driving around the country, just looking at different art districts and startup centers, because I was like, I know I love entrepreneurship and I love creative stuff. So let's go look at those. They happen to all be like the best ones, all happen to be in the same place in each, like same places in each town.
Using your happiness and your comfort as a gauge for what you should be engaged in. And
the more I can put up with, the more I like this vein I'm going through, was basically how I looked at it.
That's not how a lot of people don't have that ability. Like, they find themselves in situations where they can't afford things. It's like, I just need to work more overtime. Yep. It's like, even when I explained to you that, I'm making this money at Disney, I'm working 20 hours a week, and that became normalized, like 20 overtime hours on top of going to school. There are so many people that exist on that level and don't have a choice. They're like, I had to work 20 hours of overtime just to make ends meet. And that's not even like a benefit. It's just like, I get to eat and pay rent.
So you ready for the real mind fuck for me? So the person that introduced me to the philosophy, I did not appreciate it at the time, and it made me mad. So his philosophy was, yeah, dude, I mean, here's what I want to do. I want to work as little as possible so that I can live life as much as possible. And he's like, these are the things that I really enjoy doing. This costs this much, this costs this, it was like, I have, the one of the hot springs that he owned a bar. So like, for one, he didn't, he didn't run a 24/7 bar. He had a bar nightclub, like cocktail bar combo type building. And he set it up so that like, till Thursday, basically, he like looked at it and he's like, cool, we're making like $100 a night on Wednesday and Tuesday. And maybe sometimes you lose money while you're paying staff. So he would staff up and they would be open Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then
no one's going to go clubbing on Sunday.
Well, no, but like the thing for him was that he likes to go to the hot springs and have wine and chill in the hot springs on Sundays. So like girlfriends, whatever, crazy. And just like go hang out.
Making slamming money.
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing is I can't remember. We've looked at it and like he looked at because we had really cool conversations about it. He was like, yeah, dude, I mean, honestly, when I think about it, I'm like, for me to be perfectly happy, I need to make $300 a night. So he was a killer DJ, so it worked out good, but he would DJ unless it was like, if it was a special event, you're not getting a special DJ because the people are already built in. So you're just losing money by bringing somebody in special. He didn't bring names in. The producers brought names in to try to throw their own shows and like build up their companies. So he didn't have to take the risk and he would just give them part of the bar. But yeah, it took me a long time because I was also in the build-up mode. So like he's probably 40 and I was probably like 25 and I was living with him. So it was a good deal because he had it honestly kind of figured out as far as no like insanely huge ambitions, but like, dude, he'd go and end up like he had the freedom to do whatever he wanted. And that was like where the sweetness of the setup was. So like if he wanted to go DJ the Calgary Stampede for our friends that had an FMX show up there for 2 weeks, he'd just go do that, get to just like party for 2 weeks and DJ, motorcycles doing backflips and then go hang out in Calgary for 2 weeks. And it was like a vacation, except for he gets paid each night.
Wow.
So yeah. And so like that was where like once I left the corporate stuff, Montana's very seasonal. So I started to realize like, oh, all my big projects end up being 3 weeks of spring when things are really like they've greened up, but they haven't dried out yet. And 3 weeks of fall where we have peak colors. And so I just concentrated on really, really making those my big like money makers. And I probably made 80% of my money just those 6 weeks of the year. And then the stuff that I would pick up or whatever, like everything I filled in with that was projects that I wanted to do. And I had the skills to like, I wanted to interview artists. So I just looked around, found some artists and started like doing my own little mini doc, 3-5 minute pieces on like unique random things that I either came across or was, found interesting and wanted to see more about.
Oh, right.
And then damn COVID. So I had to go and be like, all right, I guess I'm going for a full mix. Because the thing was, the problem for me is like, there's no way for me to get a Netflix show. So like my goal with those was like, all right, if I do like 5 of these minis, I could either like sell them to a business for like $3 to $5 grand a piece, which would, be not a bad deal for these types of pieces of content. And I can put them together and make a trailer and try to pitch it to somebody. Thing is like you don't know anybody in Montana, so like where I'm pitching it is trying to get like the state chamber of commerce to build out like, hey, you guys have made in Montana, how about if I make a bunch of made in Montana videos that are like 5 minutes, super cool, not old school, like look like they'd be on the local TV station, because they don't like local commercials are bad because they're not incentivized to be good. Like they come out of the same budget as the TV budget. So they're going to go make those commercials as cheap and easy as possible.
Yeah. And they're no frills. They're not trying to woo you in on anything.
Yeah. Cause you're paying for placement. You're not paying for the commercial.
And then when you go into like, you bring up the Netflix thing, the Netflix is based on a structure where they buy out and own every content that's presented to them. And at that point, you only have input as, whatever they hire you as. So, if you're strong enough to negotiate that I need to be the creative director on this, then you'll get hired as a creative director. But the property itself now belongs to them, and you're no longer longer have creative reins on it. And that's the same structure that the big studios like Disney operate on. And it depends on how good it is.
For me, that probably would have been a good thing. Not gonna lie.
No, it is.
Because like I'm not, I was like, I want to give birth to a thing and make it happen. I'm not necessarily the guy that like, cause I'm not the guy that's dedicated to cinematography. I'm not a director. I'm not, you know what I mean? Like I have a general ability to put the things together and dabble, but I'm like, no, if I was going to build something for Netflix, like, yeah, I would want to have like a DP that has a little more director leaning input. I mean, and then I would be like weird at the top being like, what do I do with my hands?
I mean, that's pretty much how Quentin Tarantino got started. So he basically made True Romance. So he wrote True Romance. True Romance, he didn't direct, or he wasn't tied to. He just sold that. And you can see that it's very Quentin Tarantino when you watch it.
Mm-hmm. It's styled in his style, but
that gave birth to Reservoir Dogs and everything that came, and him becoming a director after that. So
gotta be interesting to see how those like come through, because there had to be like a connection or something, because that's it's always like somebody has that conversation or whatever, and it's like, hey, you need to do like, I wish that you could zoom in and see the like you have approval conversation for like all of the different like creatives across the board that have made it big.
I used to say the same thing, because some of them I don't get at all. I'm like, wow, you got greenlit on that? Like, that got greenlit? It just depends on the situation.
Because part of it, I'm sure, is like, rich family, whatever. But there's definitely like, I like when I'm saying that, I'm saying about like the people that kind of broke out or like came from an unexpected place. I just always wonder if it's like, you were smoking a cigarette in the back, of a bar and ended up bullshitting with the right person, and that like whether it ended up being a situation of somebody saw your work and you had that conversation, or if it ended up being like this person introduced you to this person led to this person led to this person. Because my guess is that if you had like, because it's always weird side doors for me. So there's never a like, oh, I met this person and then they were like, hey, I want to help you out, and introduced me directly to the person that like led to something.
I'm the same way. There's layers of side doors.
Always.
Like, oh, that worked. And I feel like I'm always on this like, did you ever read The Alchemist? I feel like The Alchemist is my life.
Okay, like, yeah. No, I audiobooked it, but yes.
You start off in this place, you go to this other place, you go to this other place, all to come all the way back from where you were supposed to be in the beginning. And you never knew you had never knew you had this in your hand to begin with. You never knew that you had this benefit that you might work with.
And sometimes it's got to get honestly, time too with some stuff. You just have to have time to like realize it all, or reflect on it and realize it's there, or do the right amount of things to be comfortable doing it, or be fed up with the right amount of things to be like comfortable just being like, screw it, I'm in a different place, in a different mindset, and I'm going to go for it or whatever. But
yeah. The internal confidence and the internal like drive. Like, this works.
Dust yourself off.
Yeah.
Well, we're probably running long, I would have to imagine. But
it's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure.
It felt like a really good.
We just need like a vacation where we go and like do something for like 2.5 weeks. I'm like, that's what I would love, working with people on a project in real life, because like you have all the downtime of the day, like whether you're around set, whatever. That's the part that I ideate about, is like, oh yeah, no, it'd be cool because like I'd have people that I work with, so I could like have conversations while stuff's boring, or like in between things.
I'm usually having those conversations in my head by myself anyway, like on runs or whatever.
Got to keep myself comfortable. Well, thank you so much, Orlando, for coming on the show. Everybody,
thanks for having me.
We are getting back into a more normal routine. We did a community chill this week, and hopefully we'll maybe do one of those a month or something like that, because that was pretty fun. And yeah, So if you made it to this point in the show, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening, and have a great week, and we'll talk to you next week.